Hi everyone, hope you're all well. We've got an interesting subject today. We're going to cover logrotate. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably think, oh yeah, logrotate, whatever. Been using it for years, very, very simple, etc. Well, I recently had a project where I had to use logrotate, and the one thing I realized very quickly was that I only knew a minimal amount about logrotate. It's actually a far larger subject than I thought. I also didn't fully understand. I thought I did, but I didn't fully understand how it actually works in terms of frequency of log rotation, etc. Just to be clear, by the way, in case the terminology doesn't mean anything to you, log rotate means you have a log which is growing and it begins to get out of hand, its size. It either becomes unmanageable because obviously if you've got a log of 10 gigabytes, if you try to load it into VI or something, it's going to take a long time. So it's very convenient to split the log into smaller chunks as time passes for two reasons. One of them is manageability, and the other one is that at some point you're going to run out of disk space. So you can either choose to rotate your logs into smaller chunks and then at some point migrate the older ones off to some long-term storage, or in fact delete them. It may be that you only need to keep the last few months of logs. That's what we're doing. I've set up a kind of pseudo logging environment here. So I've got 6 machines in total. They are logging to one machine, to Firebird actually, and Firebird is collating all these logs in Syslog, and logrotate is rotating them when they reach 1 gigabyte. That was just an arbitrary decision on my part. So we'll go and have a look at those. So here's a simple diagram of what we're going to look at. I knew you'd be impressed. Um, okay, it's not very simple, so let's break it down. But that's what I've built, believe it or not. It looks horrendously complicated, but let's have a look at it. Okay, first element of this is that we're using our syslog, and that is relatively simple, and we're not going to cover it today. I do plan to do a video on our syslog, but just in essence, let me show you what's going on here. So we are running a script called create big log, and what that's doing is creating a load of traffic which it's sending to Firebird, and to the specifically to the rsyslog service. I'm using a command called logger to log information. Now, because I started off with all sorts of things like generating random text and goodness knows what, and in the end, I decided to use fortune cookies. There's an old Unix command that generates fortune cookies because at least it's vaguely amusing. And so that's what that's doing. It's generating loads of messages which are getting logged by the rsyslog service, and it's writing it by default to varlog syslog. We could configure it to write to other places, but that's where it writes by default, and so that's what I'm using. And then that is configured, by the way. The master configuration file is syslog.conf, which we don't normally edit that file. And then there is a directory, etc., rsyslog.d, and under there we have a whole bunch of standard configuration files that come out of the box. And I've added one called remote, which in a second we'll see what that does. But basically that says that Firebird is prepared to accept messages or logging from other servers. So that's basically what that's all about. So that's that bit of that massive diagram out of the way. So let's now look at the next bit. And this is if we add logging from a remote service. So we've got Trans Am, Mustang, Charger, Cobra, and Camaro all logging to Firebird, and Firebird is logging as well with that create big script. So there's quite a lot of traffic coming in here. And it's going through the rsyslog service and it's updating varlog syslog, which is now in red because it's in danger of growing so huge that we're going to run out of space in /var. So that's the whole objective of this, obviously. So I have configured I've configured logrotate to actually handle that situation, and that's what we're interested in. That's what we're going to look at. But just so that you're aware of how this is done, in the client machines, in other words, the machines that are sending logs to Firebird, in a directory called etc rsyslog.d, there is a script which I've called 10-forward.conf, and in there it has star.star, which means all logs. Okay, the logs consist of two parts. There is the facility, which is where did this log come from, what subsystem generated the log, and the level, what used to be called severity, and the severity is what type of log is this? Is it a bit? Is it just information, or is it debugging? Is it warning? Is it an error, etc. And like I say, when we cover syslog, I'll go into detail over those. And then finally, we've got this somewhat cryptic-looking entry, which basically says, where am I going to send these logs and to which port? Okay, and the at sign, if there was a single at, it would mean use UDP, but there are two ats, so that's saying use TCP, which is the recommended nowadays. So that's what that means. Okay, so these servers are now all logging to Firebird. And then on Firebird, he won't accept logs by default, but I've created another file called remote under our syslog.d, and that simply includes modules that support the idea of receiving logs from remote servers. So that's what that's about. So now let's look at what we're interested in today, and that's logrotate. Okay, so the previous bit is all very interesting, but all that's doing is generating massive logs. So basically, this is what logrotate looks like. It's a service, so there is a logrotate service, but the service doesn't run as a daemon, so it's not continuously running. It is triggered by logrotate.timer. So logrotate.timer triggers logrotate.service, who reads instructions from etc logrotate.conf, which is the master configuration file, and from etc logrotate.d. And logrotate.d has some standard configuration files that come out of the box. And then we also have our local ones. So I've got one called my Syslog. And what my Syslog does is actually uh, say that when this file reaches or when the syslog file reaches a particular size, then I want you to archive it. I want you to compress it. How many copies do I want to keep? Uh, what age should I keep them for? There are all sorts of arguments and options, and we're going to look at those in a minute. And that's when we end up with this ridiculous diagram that I showed you at the beginning. The bit that we're interested in is down here, and that's what we're going to look at in detail. And what it's doing actually is looking at var syslog. When it hits 1 gigabyte, it is then archiving it into a subdirectory of root called /archive, which is a separate volume. And in /archive, it stores gzipped versions of the log. Now, these are the logs. Varlog syslog is text, and gzip is really efficient at compressing text files. So it compresses them by way over 50%. It's like 67% efficiency. So there's a real saving in space there. So that's the setup. That's what we've got to work with. So let's go and have a look at it. So here we are over on Firebird. Let's start off by actually proving that this is working. So if I do a tail -f of /var log syslog, you can see it's going completely insane. And this has been running for about a week, by the way. I started looking at this about a week ago, and there we go. So, and as I say, it's generating fortune cookies, which are all very amusing, but we're not going to get sidetracked by looking at those right now. Right, so let's have a look at my create big log script, create, where am I? Let's just find out what directory. I'm in my home directory. So cd to logrotate, cat create big log.script, and it's running Fortune, which is a simple game, as I say, from back in the 70s, possibly earlier. I'm not sure when it was written. Okay, there's a bunch of TRs and SEDs and God knows what, because I found out, which probably could be simplified dramatically with a decent awk script, but there were all sorts of problems with the Fortune cookies span multiple lines. They have embedded tabs which don't display correctly, and all sorts of weird and wonderful problems. So that's what the little bit of text manipulation is. So we run Fortune and pipe it into Logger. It's as simple as that. And Logger by default actually logs to the facility user dot notice. So facility user level notice. Not that that matters for this, but that is just running flat out. Originally, I had a sleep in there. I thought, oh, I better slow it down. But no, as we'll see, it does generate an awful lot of log information, but nothing that Firebird can't handle. So one of the things I forgot to mention actually was if we do a tail minus F of varlog syslog, let it run for a second or two, then if you look back here, each log entry does actually specify which server generated the log. So Cobra, Camaro, Mustang, Charger, Trans Am. I would expect them to appear in roughly equal amounts. They're all very similar little machines, so they'll generate the logs at pretty much the same rate. So that's what we're looking at. That's the logging that's taking place. So then the next thing to look at is let's cd into etc logrotate dot directory, and let's have a look at my rsyslog. Now, first of all, let's look at the default one. /rsyslog actually has an entry in for syslog along with mail, kernel, authentication, user, cron. So these are all the facility levels, and varlog syslog is just bundled in with those, and they rotate a maximum of 4 old copies. It's done weekly. Okay, it's nothing to do with size in this example, and then there's some other entries which we're going to look at. Okay, so those are this is the default setup. So I've commented out varlog syslog in this file, and I'm going to look at my rsyslog, where I put in a deliberately overly complicated example to demonstrate to you quite how we're going to rotate these. So remember, we're in etc logrotate.d. We're looking at my rsyslog, which is a modified version of the syslog varlog syslog archiving mechanism. So I'm saying never ever. So I'm saying rotate the logs indefinitely. So don't rotate the last 5 logs, rotate them forever. And I'm also saying here, limit the age of those logs to 182, so roughly 6 months. So what it will do is it will rotate for 6 months, and then every time it generates a new log, it will, or every time a new day starts, it will delete the oldest day once you've hit the 6-month marker. Now, what you could do is choose something like this, rotate frequency of daily. Now, remember, it was weekly in the standard default example. Okay, but we're actually saying never delete, never rotate the logs. Rotate indefinitely. Yeah, do rotate them, but never limit the number of rotated logs. We're saying the maximum age is 6 months. So anything that's over 6 months will be deleted. We're saying use a date extension to the gzipped file name. So we're giving it a date extension so that we can actually see when this log was created. But we need, because we're going to be creating more than one log per day, all right, because date extension by default simply gives you the year, the month, the day, the date. Now, if you she didn't put this next bit in, and if you generated more than one log in a single day, then the second log you tried to generate would fail because it would say, hang on a minute, I'm trying to create a log and it already exists, and therefore it would fail. All right. So it wouldn't do the rotation. So what we're doing is we're actually changing the date format from the default. We're saying we want the year, the month, the day, the date, I should say, but we also want the hours, minutes, and seconds. We don't really need the seconds, I wouldn't have thought anyway. If you've got a logger that needs to rotate per second, you've got a problem. You probably need more than one Syslog server. Okay. The way this works is rename copy. So rename copy means, first of all, rename the varslog syslog file, okay, and then copy it, okay, and then send a kill minus hup to syslog daemon. Kill minus hup will simply tell syslog daemon to reopen it. Well, it tells it to reread its configuration, but the reason we're doing it is we need it to open a new var log adm messages file, okay. We're saying we want to limit the log size to 1 gig, but be careful here. Okay. The problem you've got is that do you remember at the beginning I told you that logrotate service only runs when it's triggered, and by default it's triggered daily. Okay, so you might say only rotate it when it reaches 1 gig, but if it only runs daily, by the end of the day, it might have reached 100 gig, and then it would run and it would say, oh yes, it has reached 1 gig, I'll rotate it. Whereas in fact, it was way beyond 1 gigabyte. So this was a problem I had recently on a little project I did where it was running daily by default. I was restricting it to 5 gig, but it was getting up to something like 80 gigabytes by the end of the day. So that's something we need to discuss. How do we actually trigger it more frequently than daily? Because that's what we need. And then again, var/var directory normally has a limited amount of space. It might be quite a lot, but if you want to create 6 months worth of old logs, then it probably isn't enough. So I've got a volume called /archive on Firebird, which is 500 gigabytes. And what this does is when it does the rename copy, what it does is it moves it to /archive, gzips it, and then moves on. I've also said missing OK, which means that if the log is empty, don't worry about it. Not likely to happen, but otherwise that would cause an error. I'm saying if the file is empty, don't bother rotating it. Well, okay, it wouldn't anyway because we've said we want it to be a size of 1 gigabyte. But I'm just trying to give you a lot of examples of settings that you can use. I'm saying compress, okay, so that because our log files are going to be over 1 gig because of the granularity of the timer, they will be over 1 gig. So we compress them. And in fact, in my experience, they're coming out at around about 1.2 gigabyte by the time the way I've got it set up. And they compress down to less than 500 gigabytes. So it's well worth doing the compression. Okay. The delay compress, there's no particular reason why I've done this other than to show you all of these wonderful options. Delay compress simply means when you rotate a log, don't compress it, compress the one previously. So you've always got one uncompressed copy. And I guess there is a logic in that. I mean, you might want to look at what's happened recently and it would save you having to decompress it before you look at it. Okay. Runs as the user Syslog and the group ADM. Funnily enough, I've got that commented out for reasons I can't remember. But Syslog owns the varlog syslog system, so I'm not sure why I commented that out. It might have been an accident, but I'll leave it for the moment. And shared scripts applies to the next line, actually. There is a script called post rotate. And what this says that if multiple rotations took place, then you only need run post rotate once. Now that would never happen with the current setup with Varlog Syslog. And post rotate simply runs, or optionally runs, one or more scripts, hence the end script. So if there were multiple scripts, they would all appear between post rotate and end script. In this case, we run a user lib rsyslog hyphen rotate, which is a standard script which simply sends a kill -1 to the syslog daemon, which tells it basically to reopen var log syslog so that it starts logging again to a new file. Okay, and that's all that does, and it's a standard script, by the way. It's not one that I've written or that needs to be written. And that's basically all there is to the configuration from the file point of view. So now let's do a system CTL, system, I can't type, CTL status of logrotate dot service. And we can see that the logrotate service is loaded, all right, but it's inactive. So it's active, inactive. In other words, what's the activity state? It's inactive, it's dead, and it's been dead for 35 minutes, apparently. Okay, I wonder why that is. All right, but this just shows that it's not a daemon. This is simply running periodically and then looking at its configuration files, and it looks at its configuration files every time it's run. So if you make a change to the configuration files, you don't have to restart anything or anything like that. So that's it. But notice this is the critical bit. It says triggered by logrotate timer. So both the logrotate service and the logrotate timer are handled by systemd, the notorious systemd. So let's have a look at the logrotate timer. And if we do a systemctl status on logrotate timer, we can see that it's loaded, it's enabled, and we can see that there is an override. Now remember, by default, system logrotate timer only runs daily. So it runs at midnight, actually. So I've had to override that because I've set a limit of 1 gig. Well, it's going to get way past 1 gigabyte by the end of the day if it only ran daily. So I've changed that. Now here, another thing that's interesting is when is it going to trigger next? So this is really useful because if you make changes, you can see whether this value looks sensible. Okay, and it tells you what it's going to trigger. It's going to trigger the logrotate service, which is what we just looked at a few seconds ago. So if you look at this again, the 22 minutes should have gone down to 20 minutes or 21 minutes. Okay, and it has, in fact. So the next trigger is 21 minutes. So that's excellent. All right. So we've got a separate timer and a separate service. The timer runs periodically, which is defined in its configuration, and it triggers the service. And it tells us here that it triggers the logrotate service. So that's all well and good. So how do we actually make changes? Well, you can hack its manifest files if you want. In other words, go down into the directory structure and actually make changes to the files. But there is actually a mechanism by which we can view and edit these. So if we do a systemctl cat logrotate.timer, it will actually show us the configuration of logrotate timer. And we can see here, this is the default. So further up is the default, and it says timer on calendar equals daily. So when do I do it? Accuracy, and this is an interesting one. Accuracy is 1 hour, and that means that it will run at midnight, but all it's really saying is it will run within the hour after midnight. Now, on a normal server that isn't completely overloaded, then it will run at midnight or a few seconds afterwards, but it could be up to 1 hour late. So that's another thing that you need to bear in mind. Okay. And it says it's wanted by the timer's target. This is when the system's booted. It's this will not start. This timer won't start until the timer's target has actually been reached. Okay. However, there is an override, and it's sorry, the color's a bit difficult to see. but there is an override which is etc. systemd system logrotate.timer override.conf, and this is what I've set up. And so I've put in timer on calendar equals hourly, accuracy is 1 minute, and persistent equals true. We'll talk about persistence in a second. Okay, hourly means what it says. This is going to run, this is going to trigger logrotate.service every hour, and it will trigger it within 1 minute of the hour. And by the way this runs, it will trigger it on the hour. So if you set it up halfway through the hour at 1/2 past the clock, then it will, the first time it will run will be at the next o'clock that occurs. Okay, so how do you do that? Okay, well, you do a systemctl edit, and by default it puts you into that awful editor Nano, but a lot of people nowadays using Linux haven't fully appreciated the wonder of VI. And so it puts you into a Nano anyway. So I always get immensely confused here because I never use Nano. I always use VI because it is such an incredibly powerful, wonderful editor. Whereas Nano is fine. It's simple and easy to use, but it's pretty rubbish, really. You've got to be honest. Anyway, so it clearly says here, anything between here and the comment below will become the contents of the drop-in file. So this is your override. You do have to put the timer in square brackets statement. If you don't put that in there, it will silently fail to do what you want it to do. So I've simply said on calendar equals hourly, the accuracy second is 1 minute, and the persistence is true. Okay, so it's between here and this comment here, and it is clearly commented where it should be. Okay, and that's it. That's how you change the frequency. Now, on this recent project I was on, I had to set that to 15 minutes, which would be 15 min, because hourly, the log file went past 5 gigabytes. So you can imagine then the whole point of this is to try to choose a time for on calendar that is means that your log file is going to be roughly around the size that you would like it to rotate at. Okay, so how do you get out of this awful editor? Control X, that's it. Sorry, I shouldn't be rude about Nano. A lot of people use it, and that's fine. It's just I love VI because it is so powerful. Okay, there you go. There's my bit of politics out of the way for the day. So that's how you change it. We've seen how you can cat it. Now, when you change that, you do need to restart it. So you would do a systemctl, and you'd do a reload, logrotate, logrotate.timer. Why is tab not working? I don't know. I don't even care. So we do a systemctl reload logrotate timer, fail to reload. Oh, we need to do a restart. We're not allowed to do a reload. There you go. I'm learning all the time. So we do a restart. There you go. And if we now do the status again, then we'll see that it actually says down here, stopped logrotate timer and started logrotate timer. And it says it's got 15 minutes left. And that's because it's, if coincidentally, not quite 45. I'm sure it runs on the 15. I don't know. Anyway, it will run every 15 minutes. That's the important thing. Maybe I'm a bit confused about what I know. If you set it to hourly, it definitely. No, that's correct. Okay, because it was. It's got 15 minutes left to get to the hour, to get to the o'clock, because I've set it to. I've set it to run every hour. So just demonstrating what I was. Oh, you can't get the staff. Okay, so that's a quick introduction to logrotate. No, I think that's covered the basics of that. So let's now go and have a look at what's going on. So if we look in, first of all, let's just look at /var/log syslog. We can see, actually, let me put an H for human readable in there. We can see that it's got to 1.1 gig. So it is going to rotate in 15 minutes time. Should we just sit here for 15 minutes and see whether it really does? What we can do is, though, we can look in /archive, and I'm going to pipe this into tail because this has been running for over a week. My servers are going to be so grateful when I finish this session, because I've got to be able to turn off all this logging and they can all go back to sleep again, which is what they normally do. Pipe it into tail, and we can see there are syslog files which are all roughly, well, they're all very similar size actually, 463 megabytes. Okay, well, no, sorry, it's 463 megabytes. If we do an H, they're all roughly the same size, and that's because of the granularity that I've chosen. It turns out every time I look, actually, the previous log file, which is not compressed, do you remember there's always one that isn't compressed, is always around about 1.2 gigabytes. And you can see from this, it's taken roughly 2 hours to hit 1 point, even with 5 servers going bonkers. No, it's 6 in total, going bonkers, because they're all fairly low-end servers. It's actually not generating that much stuff. But it's every 2 hours it's rotating, it's compressing them. The compression is really advantageous because it's going from 1.2 gigabyte-ish down to 440 megabyte-ish. Okay, so that's basically what logrotate is all about. And we can see that even after a week, I've only used 52 gigabytes. If I hadn't compressed, that would have been at just over 100 gigabytes. And if I wanted to keep this for 6 months, then I'd probably need to increase the size. That's because that's only a week. How many weeks are there in 6 months? 26. So we'd be getting close to filling that up after 6 months. So hopefully you found that useful and you enjoyed it. If you did, please do subscribe and like. Um, it doesn't work. Nobody takes any notice, do they? Everybody who does videos on YouTube says, please subscribe and like and click on notify. But it does actually help get I mean, YouTube is weird. Nobody understands how it works. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you again shortly, and we'll cover another random Linux topic on something interesting. I've got to do Syslog. I really could do with some suggestions. If you've got anything you would like covering, please let me know, because I have my take on things. If you're anything like me, if you need to learn something, I tend to look at about half a dozen different videos on the topic, and usually pick up different aspects of whatever it is from each of those topics. So please come back next week and watch the next video, which will be equally as exciting, I promise you.